Chapter 3 Attack. Fifth period still had 10 minutes to go, and Ben was the first to finish the test, which happened a lot in social studies. Kings and queens, generals and presidents, wars and battles and maps and timelines. He loved seeing how all the people and events fit together. It was like a huge jigsaw puzzle. He turned the test over, folded his arms on top of it, and put his head down. He tried to let his mind go blank, tried to let all the tangled events of the day drift away. But as he stared at the far wall, the portrait of George Washington caught his attention. And then he saw that the man had blue eyes. And that made him start thinking about Mr. Keene again. And he didn't want to. So he closed his eyes, then he yawned and started feeling like he might fall asleep. And he didn't want to do that either. So he made himself sit up and turned his head to look out the window a while. As always, the view was fantastic, even better than the view from the captain's tombstone. Mrs. Heinemann's room was on the third floor of the original Oak School, and the big windows faced due east. Because the building was exactly 50 feet from the water's edge, Ben could see 3 distinct sailboats and a fishing traveler cutting across Barclay Bay. Seagulls hovered above the shoreline wings, almost motionless. Beaks aimed downward as they scanned for food, and a few hundred yards out, 2 kayakers made their way south, paddles flashing in the sunlight, both boats bright yellow against the blue waves. The building had been a school since 1783, and Ben thought all of the other kids, like him, thousands and thousands of them, who had sat staring out at the sea through these very same windows, wishing they were on board some ship, sailing away from Massachusetts, headed for distinct lands. Ben had lived all of his life a few blocks from this place. His mom and dad had pushed him on the playground swings back when he was little. Ben had climbed most of the trees and had played twilight games of kick the can on the wide lawns. He had spent hot afternoons sitting on the harbor side wall with a fishing pole. And in just 4 weeks, the old school would be completely gone, torn down, hauled away. Because it was like Mr. Keene had said, the Edgeport Town Council had voted, and the school and the 20 acres around it had been sold to a big company that wanted to build a theme park. But the sale hadn't happened overnight or anything. For the past several years, it seemed like every time he flipped past the local cable TV channel, there was some noisy public hearing about it. And Ben knew he had mostly tuned it out. Because why try to fight against the inevitable? The town council had called the final deal a great step forward, a leap of progress for Edgeport. But to Ben, it looked like the past had done battle with the future, and as usual, the future had won. The whole town was changing faster and faster, and Ben hated it. As he stared out to sea, a sarcastic smile formed on his lips, almost a sneer. Welcome to the exciting new theme of Benjamin Pratt's life, change. When his parents separated 2 months ago, it had come as a complete surprise. One morning, it was, Ben, your mom and I have something we need to discuss. And the next day, his dad had moved out. His dad still lived close by, actually very close. He was staying on their sailboat, which was docked at Parsons Marina, less than half a mile south of the school along the waterfront. So he got to see his dad all the time. But the separation was a huge, unwelcome change. A sudden motion in the air off to the right caught Ben's eyes. It was a gull or some other seabird out there. No, this thing was big, as big as a mailbox on a street corner, except it was reddish-brown and wider at the bottom than it was at the top. The thing was gliding away in a low, lazy arc over the water of the bay, but then it slowed until it hung in midair, about 300 feet away from the old school building. That's strange. And as he watched, this odd-shaped lump began moving again, heading straight back toward the school, picking up speed, coming faster and faster. Ben tried to shout out a warning, tried to scream, "Hey, that thing is coming! It's almost here!" But fear clamped his throat shut. He blinked his eyes wider as the thing neared, and then it was just feet away from the windows of the third-floor classroom. He suddenly knew what it was. A wrecking ball. 3 tons of scarred, rusty steel hissing through the salty air at 40 miles an hour. It hit the building like a locomotive, splintered the glass and the wood of the window frames. Bricks and chunks of granite from the outer wall flew past Ben's head, shattering the slate blackboards. The round blob of metal tore upward through the old wooden floorboards, breaching like an angry whale, rising toward the ceiling. Electric wires snapped and sparked and crackled through a fog of plaster dust. Desks and chairs, books and computers, maps and papers flew upward and seemed to hang in midair. Kids screamed and rushed for the door, only to see the door smashed to bits. And Ben still couldn't move, couldn't make a sound. Finally, he found his voice and shouted, "Stop! Stop it! Stop it now!" A distant engine growled, and then came a squealing sound. The thick cable at the top of the wrecking ball snapped taut, and the thing slithered away through the huge hole it had ripped in the front of the school. But the ball swung out over the harbor, and then started to rush back toward the building. Ben screamed again, "No! No! Ben!" Someone grabbed him by the shoulder, tried to pull him to safety as the ball rushed closer. "Ben! No!" he yelled, and he tried to pull the hand off his shoulder. He turned and saw his father. Terrified, he yelled, "Dad, you've got to get out of here! Come on, Ben! Wake up! Wake all the way up!" Ben sat up straight and looked around, his eyes wild, his brown hair stuck to his forehead. It was Mrs. Hyman who was shaking him, and all the kids in the class stared, a few looking concerned, but most of them laughing and whispering to each other. Mrs. Hyman clapped her hands twice. "Hush, everyone, quiet! You've got 5 more minutes to finish the test." The room went silent. Ben heard a snort from his right and turned to see Robert Gurrett with a big grin on his face, which was just like him. He loved it when Ben messed up. Mrs. Hyman could see Ben was all right, so she walked back to the front of the class. And Ben was all right. Sort of. He sat there, his face bright red, his palms pressed flat against the test papers on his desk. His heart was still pounding, partly from embarrassment, but mostly because the dream had been so awful. He turned to sneak a quick peek out the window, but to be sure things really were okay. No wrecking ball, not today. But like his mom and dad's separation, that part wasn't a dream. The wrecking ball was coming for real, and soon. Because Mr. Keene was right. The school was definitely under attack. So I'm going to give you just a few minutes to jot down any words if you didn't already. I saw a few of you write a few words down as I was reading. Off to the left-hand side, beginning. Couple of sentences, what happens in the beginning of that chapter. Skip a line. Middle, what's going on in the middle of the chapter. Skip a line, what happens at the end. Do not rewrite the whole chapter. Give me the main ideas of what happened. Luca's not here today? Who else is absent today? Nope, Christina's here now. Everybody from Mrs. Eifler's Morning is here now too. If somebody's not here and you're going to tell them what happened in the chapter, you're writing just enough so they understand the beginning, the middle, the end. Oh, Viola's gone too. So if you were going to tell her, if she comes to you and says, "What's the story about?" Well, in the beginning of the chapter this happened, and then in the middle this happened, and then the end this happened. Just a couple of sentences each. Doing it independently right now.